Story 1. Beneath Old Town, I found something in the Shanghai tunnels last month that the Portland Historical Society doesn't want anyone to know about. And I'm going to tell you exactly what it was before they find a way to silence me permanently. The tunnels run beneath Old Town Portland like veins under skin. Miles of underground passages connecting basements, linking buildings, spreading out in a network that nobody has fully mapped. They say the tunnels were used for Shanghaiing back in the 1800s. Trapdoors in saloon floors, unsuspecting men drinking their beer one moment, waking up on a ship headed to Shanghai the next. Forced labor, human trafficking, a dark trade that thrived in the shadows beneath the city. I am a restoration contractor, 43 years old. I've worked on dozens of historic buildings in Portland. When the owner of a building on Burnside hired me to assess water damage in the basement, I thought it would be routine work. Check for mold, evaluate the foundation, write up an estimate. Standard procedure. The building was built in 1889. Brick facade, original wood floors. The kind of structure that has survived earthquakes and floods and 130 years of neglect. The basement was accessible through a steel door in the back alley. Rusted hinges, padlock that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. The owner gave me the key, warned me the basement was unstable, told me to be careful, told me not to go past the main room. But he didn't tell me about the tunnel entrance. Didn't he mention what was hidden behind the collapsed brick wall in the northeast corner? The air in that basement hit me like a physical thing. Cold, damp, thick with the smell of rot and standing water. My flashlight beam showed a space maybe 30 feet square. Exposed beams overhead. Concrete floor cracked and buckled. And along the far wall, I saw it. A section where the bricks had fallen away, revealing darkness beyond. A passage leading deeper underground. I should have called the owner, should have documented it and left. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I've worked in old buildings my entire career. I've seen hidden rooms, forgotten spaces, secret passages that don't appear on any blueprint. But I never found an entrance in the Shanghai tunnel. Never had direct access to that underground world. I stepped through the opening. The passage was narrow, maybe 4 feet wide, 7 feet high. The walls were brick, old brick, hand-laid. The mortar was crumbling. Pieces fell away when I touched them. The floor sloped downward at a gentle angle, leading deeper, taking me farther from daylight with every step. 20 feet in, I found the first artifact. A bottle, green glass, embossed with a logo I didn't recognize. Lying on its side against the wall, I picked it up. The glass was thick, heavy, the kind of bottle that would have held whiskey or rum, the kind they have served in the saloons above these tunnels. 30 feet further, I found a shoe. Men's shoe, leather, completely rotted. But the sole was still intact. The nails that held it together were rusted but visible. And inside the shoe, pressed into the leather insole, I could see the outline of toes. The impression of a foot that had walked in that shoe over a century ago. The tunnel branched, left and right, both passages disappearing into darkness. I chose left, followed it for another 50 feet. The air was getting colder. My breath came out in visible clouds, and I started hearing sounds. Not footsteps, not voices, just a low hum, like electricity running through wires. But these tunnels were built before electricity, before power lines, before anything modern. The passage opened into a larger chamber, maybe 20 feet across, circular, with 5 other tunnels branching off in different directions. A hub, a central point where multiple passages converged. And in the center of the chamber, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A chair, wooden, simple construction, sitting in the exact middle of the space. And strapped to that chair with rotted leather restraints was a skeleton. I approached slowly. My light played over the bones. The skull was intact. The jaw hung open. The eye sockets stared at nothing. The arms were bound to the armrests. The legs were bound to the chair legs. Whoever this person was, they'd been restrained. Left here, abandoned in the darkness to die. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the other skeletons. I saw them when I shined my light around the chamber. 7 more. All in chairs, all restrained, all positioned in a circle facing inward, like they were watching something, or waiting for something, or participating in something I couldn't begin to understand. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I took photos, documented everything. Then I noticed the walls. They were covered in marks, scratches, dozens of them, hundreds, covering every surface. And they weren't random. They formed patterns, words, messages carved by fingernails into brick. Most were illegible, worn away by time and moisture. but I could make out some of them. Help, God, Mother, please, the desperate pleas of people who have been trapped down here. People who died in this darkness. I found dates, 1887, 1891, 1894. Names, John, William, James, Sarah. At least one woman had been brought down here. At least one woman had died in these tunnels. Then I found something that didn't fit the timeline. A message carved deeper than the others. Fresher. The brick around it was lighter, less weathered. The words were in block letters. Clear, deliberate. They still bring us down here. Below that, a date. 2019. My stomach dropped. 2019. 5 years ago. Someone had carved that message 5 years ago. Someone had been in this chamber, in this circle of death, recently enough that the mark was still visible, still fresh. I backed away from the wall, turned to leave. That's when my light caught something moving. Not in the chamber, in one of the tunnels. A shadow, human-shaped, walking toward me. I called out, asked if anyone was there. No response, just footsteps, slow, steady, getting closer. I could hear breathing now, labored, wet, like someone with fluid in their lungs. The shadow emerged into the chamber. My light hit it full on. It was a man, or something that used to be a man. His clothes were rotted. His skin was gray. His eyes were milky white. And his hands were covered in blood. Fresh blood, dripping onto the tunnel floor. He looked at me, through me, like I was the ghost and he was solid. Then he sat down in one of the empty chairs, positioned himself facing the center of the circle. And he went still, perfectly still, like the skeletons around him, like he was waiting, joining whatever ritual or torture or madness had created this place. I ran, didn't analyze, just ran back the way I become. My flashlight beam bounced wildly. I tripped over debris, scraped my shoulder on the brick walls. But I didn't stop, didn't look back. Just ran until I burst through that opening into the basement, into the building, into daylight. I called the police, told them what I found. Human remains in the tunnels. Multiple victims. Recent activity. They sent officers to investigate. I took them back to the basement, showed them the opening, led them through the passage to the chamber. But when we got there, the chamber was empty. No chairs, no skeletons, no carvings on the walls. Just an empty circular room with 5 tunnels branching off. The officers looked at me like I was insane. Asked if I was sure this was the right location. Asked if maybe I imagined it. Stress, fatigue, carbon monoxide from poor ventilation. I showed them the photos on my phone. Pulled up the images I'd taken. But they were gone. All of them. Deleted. Every photo I'd taken in that chamber had vanished from my device. No record. No proof. Just my word against an empty room. The building owner fired me the next day. Said I violated the terms of our contract. Said I accessed areas I wasn't authorized to enter. Said he never wanted to see me again. When I tried to explain, he hung up. When I tried calling back, he blocked my number. I went to the Portland Historical Society. Talked to researchers who specialize in the Shanghai tunnels. Showed them my sketches of the chamber layout. Described what I'd seen. They were polite, patient, but they didn't believe me. They said the tunnels have been thoroughly explored, documented, mapped. They said there's no chamber matching my description. No evidence of the kind of activity I described. But I know what I saw. I know what I found. And I know something else. Something I haven't told anyone until now. When I was running out of that tunnel, I heard voices behind me. Multiple voices, speaking in unison, chanting. The words weren't English, weren't any language I recognized. But the tone was clear. It was a summoning, a calling, an invitation. I've been having dreams since that day. Every night, the same dream. I'm back in the chamber, sitting in one of the chairs. Restraints tied on my wrists and ankles. The other chairs are occupied now, all 8 of them, and we're all staring at the center of the circle, waiting for something to arrive. Something that has been climbing up through the earth for 130 years. Something that is almost ready to emerge. Last week, I saw one of them. One of the people from my dream, standing on a street corner in Old Town. Same rotted clothes, same gray skin, same milky eyes. He was watching the sidewalk, watching people walk past, like he was selecting, choosing, deciding who would be next. I tried to follow him, lost him in the crowd near the Saturday market. But I know where he was going. I know where they all go. Down through the trapdoors, through the hidden passages, into the tunnels that still run beneath this city like veins beneath skin. The Shanghai tunnels, Aaron, to history. They are not tourist attractions. They reactive, operating, still serving their original purpose, still taking people down into the darkness, still feeding whatever waits in that circular chamber. Portland has a missing persons problem, homeless population that fluctuates in ways the city can, to explain. People who vanish without a trace. The official explanation is that they move to other cities, seek services elsewhere, just drift away. But I know the truth. They were not drifting. They were being taken, pulled down into the earth, added to the circle. I am leaving Portland, moving to Arizona, somewhere flat, somewhere dry, somewhere without tunnels or basements or underground passages. But I know it won't matter, because I was invited, I was seen. And once they've been seen by whatever lives in those tunnels, it never stops watching. Last night, I felt it for the first time. The pull, the compulsion, the urge to walk back to that building on Burnside, to descend into that basement, to step through that opening and follow the passage down to the chamber, down to the circle, down to take my place in the chair that is waiting for me. I am writing this as a warning, as a record, as proof that something is wrong beneath Portland. The Shanghai tunnels are real. The stories are true, but they were not complete. They were not finished. The Shanghai never stopped. It just evolved, adapted, found new victims, new purposes. If you visit Portland, stay out of Old Town after dark. Done to explore the basements of historic buildings. Done to investigate strange sounds or follow people who don't look quite right. And if you find an opening in a brick wall leading to darkness below, seal it up. Pour concrete, build a barrier, do whatever it takes to keep it closed, because they were still down there, still waiting, still watching, and they were always hungry for more. Story 2. White figure. I saw the Lady of Cannon Beach for the first time on a Tuesday night in October, and by the time I understood what I was actually looking at, it was already too late to leave. She was standing at the edge of my motel room parking lot, perfectly still in the fog that rolled off the Pacific like something alive. A woman in a long white dress that seemed to glow with its own light, bright enough to hurt my eyes even from 50 feet away. But it was what she didn't have that made my hands freeze on the steering wheel and my breath catch in my throat. She had no face, just smooth, blank skin where features should have been, and she was staring directly at me. I'd driven to Cannon Beach to escape. Stupid reason, but honest. My wife of 16 years had left me 3 months earlier, taking our son and half of everything I worked for. The divorce papers came with a restraining order I didn't deserve and accusations that made me a stranger to people who had known me my whole life. I lost my job, lost my house, lost any sense of who I was supposed to be, so I packed what fit in my truck and pointed it west until I hit ocean. Cannon Beach seemed as good a place as any to figure out what came next. Small coastal town in Oregon. Quiet, anonymous, the kind of place where a man could disappear for a while and maybe find himself again. The Tide SN Motel sat on the southern edge of town, away from the tourist traps clustered around Haystack Rock. 12 rooms, all facing the parking lot, with the beach and ocean just beyond a low wall of driftwood and beach grass. Off-season rates were cheap. The owner, an older man who barely looked at me when I checked in, told me I could stay as long as I wanted. Most of the rooms were empty this time of year. I'd been there for 3 days, spending my time walking the beach, drinking too much cheap whiskey, and trying to figure out how my life had fallen apart so completely. The weather matched my mood. Cold, gray, the kind of Pacific Northwest autumn where the sky and sea blur into one endless sheet of wet nothing. The woman in white appeared on my third night, just as I was pulling into the motel parking lot after another long walk in the fog. I sat in my truck, engine running, watching her stand motionless in the mist. She moved, didn't react to my headlights. Just stood there with her faceless head turned toward me like she'd been waiting. I told myself it was a trick of the fog, a reflection, something rational, but my hands were shaking when I finally killed the engine and got out of the truck. The woman was gone. The parking lot was empty except for the mist and the sound of waves crashing beyond the motel. I didn't sleep that night. Kept the lights on, kept looking out the window, expecting to see her standing there again. By sunrise, I did convince myself I imagined it. Stress, alcohol, exhaustion. The human brain creates patterns, sees things that aren't there, especially when it has been through trauma. But the motel owner, this expression when I mentioned seeing a woman in white near the parking lot, told me I hadn't imagined anything at all. He went pale, actually took a step back from the front desk where I found him reading a newspaper and drinking coffee that smelled burnt and old. He asked me what time you seen her. I told him around 11 at night. He asked if she'd been wearing a long dress. I confirmed she had. He asked the question I'd been dreading since I woke up. Did she have a face? I told him no. Told him her head had been smooth and blank and wrong in a way that made my skin crawl just remembering it. The owner, whose name I learned was Martin, set down his coffee cup with hands that trembled slightly. He told me I needed to check out. Today, immediately. No refund, but he wouldn't charge me for the remaining nights I'd already paid for. I asked why. Martin just shook his head and told me the Lady of Cannon Beach only appeared to certain people. People who were marked, people who wouldn't be staying in town much longer regardless of their plans. I thought he was crazy. Told him so. Told him I'd paid for a week and intended to stay the full week. Told him I didn't believe in ghosts or local legends or whatever small-town superstition he was trying to sell me. Martin looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been resignation. He told me it was my choice. But if I saw her again, I should leave immediately. Dawn, to try to talk to her. Dawn, to try to approach her. Dawn, to try to understand what she wants. Just pack up and drive as far from Cannon Beach as possible. Because everyone who sees the lady twice never makes it to a third time. I spent that day researching. The Cannon Beach Library had a local history section, and the librarian, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and a nervous smile, helped me find newspaper archives and old journals from longtime residents. The lady had been sighted for decades, maybe longer. The earliest documented account I found was from 1952, but the librarian told me the stories went back further. To the 1920s at least. Possibly earlier, before people wrote things down. The accounts were consistent. A woman in a glowing white dress. No facial features. She appeared in fog, always at night, always near the ocean. And she only showed herself to specific people. People who were alone. People who were struggling. People who were at some kind of crossroads in their lives. Some of the witnesses described feeling watched for days before seeing her. Others reported dreams of drowning, of being pulled under dark water, of a presence that wanted something from them but couldn't speak. And everyone who saw her more than once died within days. Car accidents, drowning, heart attacks. One man in 1978 simply vanished. His truck found abandoned on Highway 101 with the engine still running and the driver's door open. He was never seen again. The deaths were always ruled accidents or natural causes. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that would draw attention from outside investigators. Just the unfortunate reality that bad things sometimes happen to people, especially people who are already struggling with personal problems. But the locals knew. They'd known for generations. The Lady of Cannon Beach was real, and she was something far worse than a ghost. I should have left, should have packed my truck and driven east until the ocean was just a memory. But I was tired of running, tired of letting fear dictate my choices. And some part of me, the part that had already lost everything, was curious. What did this thing want? Why had it chosen me? And what would happen if I stayed and faced it instead of fleeing like everyone else apparently did? I saw her again that night. Not at the motel. On the beach itself, about a quarter-mile north of Haystack Rock. I'd gone for a walk after dark, telling myself I was just getting fresh air, but knowing deep down I was looking for her. Testing fate, daring the universe to show me something I couldn't explain away. The fog was thicker than the night before, rolling off the ocean in waves that reduced visibility to maybe 20 feet. The sound of the surf was muffled, distant, like I was hearing it through layers of cotton. No one else was on the beach. No lights from town penetrated the mist. I was completely alone in a bubble of white nothing. She emerged from the fog ahead of me, that same glowing white dress making her visible long before any normal person would have been. She was closer this time, maybe 30 feet away, and she was moving, not walking exactly, gliding. Her dress didn't move with her body. It hung perfectly still despite the wind off the ocean, defying physics in a way that made my rational mind want to shut down entirely. I stopped. She stopped. We stood there in the fog, facing each other, and I could feel her attention on me like physical weight. She had no eyes, but she was definitely looking at me, studying me, measuring something I couldn't understand. Then she raised one pale hand and pointed. Not at me, past me, back toward town, back toward the motel. I turned to look, and when I looked back, she was gone. Vanished into the fog like she never existed. But I could still feel her presence. Still feel that weight of attention pressing down on me. and I understood with sudden, terrible clarity that she was hurting me, pushing me somewhere, making me go back. The motel was dark when I returned, all the lights off, including the vacancy sign that usually glowed red above the office. My truck was the only vehicle in the parking lot. Even Martin, this old sedan that was always parked in the spot marked manager, was gone. The door to my room stood open. I knew I locked it, always locked it, but there it was, hanging wide, the darkness inside absolute and waiting. I should have gotten in my truck and driven away. Every survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me to leave, but I couldn't. Something pulled me forward, something stronger than fear or common sense. I walked to that open door and looked inside. My room had changed. The furniture was the same. The bed, the small table, the television bolted to the wall. But everything was wet, soaking wet. Water dripped from the ceiling, pooled on the floor, ran down the walls in streams that caught the faint light from outside and reflected it like tears. And in the corner, near the bathroom door, sat a pile of clothes. A woman's clothes. Old-fashioned. A white dress that might have been beautiful once but was now stained and torn and rotting with age and seawater. I stepped inside. The water was cold, seeping through my shoes, soaking my socks. The smell hit me. Salt and decay and something chemical underneath. Formaldehyde, maybe. Or something used to preserve things that should have decayed years ago. The bathroom door was closed. I didn't remember closing it. Water ran from beneath it, a steady stream that had created a dark puddle spreading across the floor. I opened the door. She was in the bathtub, the lady, but not glowing anymore. Not standing. She lay in water that filled the tub to overflowing. Her white dress spread around her like foam. And she had a face now. A real face. Young. Maybe 30. Beautiful once, but bloated with water and death. Her skin gray-green. Her eyes open and filmed over with something cloudy. Her mouth opened. Water poured out, thick and dark and full of sand. And from that mouth came a sound like wind through a cave. Like drowning, like the ocean claiming something it had lost and wanted back. I ran, burst out of that room, slipping on the wet parking lot, fumbling for my truck keys. Behind me I could hear water rushing, like a dam had broken, like the ocean itself was flooding through that motel room. I got the truck started, threw it in reverse, and nearly hit the woman standing directly behind me in the parking lot. The lady, back in her glowing dress, back to being faceless. She stood there as I swerved around her, my tires screaming on wet pavement, and she watched me flee with that eyeless gaze that felt like judgment. I drove north on Highway 101, pushing the truck faster than I should have on roads slick with fog and rain. I drove until Cannon Beach was miles behind me, until the ocean was lost in darkness, until I crossed into Washington State and the fear finally loosened its grip enough for me to pull over and breathe. I spent that night in a rest stop, doors locked, lights on, telling myself I imagined everything. Telling myself there was a rational explanation. Telling myself I had some kind of breakdown brought on by stress and alcohol and the dissolution of my life. But I couldn't explain the water. The real, physical water that had soaked my shoes and socks. That was still damp when I checked them in the harsh fluorescent lights of the rest stop bathroom. Seawater. I could taste the salt when I touched my fingers to my tongue. I researched more over the following days. Found stories I missed in my first search. Older accounts. Local legends that went back further than the written records. The lady of Cannon Beach had a name once. Emma Calloway. She lived in town in the early 1900s. Married to a fisherman who worked the waters off Tillamook Head. They'd been happy, according to the stories. Young and in love and building a life together. Until her husband's boat went down in a storm. His body was never recovered. Emma waited for weeks, walking the beach every night, watching for him to come home. She refused to believe he was dead. Refused to move on. The townspeople tried to help her. Tried to convince her to accept the truth. But she wouldn't listen. Then one night she simply walked into the ocean, put on her wedding dress, the one she married him in, and walked into the water until it closed over her head. They found her body 3 days later, washed up on the beach. But something was wrong with it. The accounts I read were vague, describing damage that didn't match drowning. Her face had been destroyed, completely obliterated, whether by rocks or marine life or something else, no one could say for certain. She was buried in the Cannon Beach Cemetery, but the grave was vandalized repeatedly over the following years. People reported seeing lights there at night, hearing crying, feeling watched. Eventually, the town stopped maintaining it. Let it fade into the coastal brush until no one remembered exactly where Emma Calloway rested. But they remembered her, because she never really left. The lady appeared to people who were lost, people who were grieving, people who were at the edge of something they couldn't come back from. And when she appeared the second time, she showed them what she did become. What drowning in despair and refusing to let go had transformed her into. Those who saw her twice always ended up in the water, always drowned, always were found with their faces destroyed just like hers had been. Emma Calloway was still waiting for her husband, still walking that beach every night. And everyone she marked, everyone who saw her glowing in the fog, became a substitute. A replacement for the man who drowned over a century ago and left her alone. I thought I escaped. Thought that by leaving Cannon Beach, I had broken whatever connection had formed between me and the lady. I drove to Portland, got a cheap apartment, started looking for work, started trying to rebuild something from the wreckage of my life. But on foggy nights, when the city felt empty and the rain came down hard enough to sound like ocean waves, I see her, standing on street corners, in parking garages, outside my apartment window on the third floor, hovering in the air, that faceless head turned toward me. She was patient. She'd been waiting for over 100 years. She could wait a little longer. I'm writing this from a motel outside Astoria. I drove here tonight because I can keep running. Because I realized something that Emma Calloway probably figured out too late. Some grief is too big to escape. Some loneliness too deep to fill. Some choices lead to places you can come back from no matter how fast you run or how far you go. I saw her tonight for the third time, standing at the edge of the parking lot, glowing in the fog, and this time when she raised her hand, she wasn't pointing away. She was beckoning, calling me forward, inviting me to stop running and accept what I'd known since I first saw her. I'm going to drive back to Cannon Beach, going to park at the Tide Ascend Motel, going to walk down to the beach and wait for her in the fog. Maybe she'll show me her face again. Maybe she'll take me to wherever her husband ended up all those years ago. Maybe drowning is just another form of letting go. Or maybe I'll finally understand what Emma Calloway has been trying to tell everyone who sees her. That some people are already drowning long before the water closes over their heads. That some ghosts are just reflections of the living who haven figured out they were already dead inside. The Lady of Cannon Beach only appears to certain people. People who are marked, people who are lost. They've been lost for a long time. Maybe it's time to stop fighting the current and let it take me wherever it wants to go. If you rereading this, and you ever find yourself in Cannon Beach on a foggy night, and you see a woman in a glowing white dress standing near the ocean, Dawn, to look at her face. Dawn, to look for one, because she doesn't have one anymore. And if you see her, it means you closer to drowning than you think. The water is always waiting, and Emma Calloway never stops walking that beach, searching for something she lost a century ago. I hope she finds it. I hope I help her find it. I hope drowning doesn't hurt as much as living has. Story 3. Terrible Tilly the Lighthouse Keeper. This log ended with 3 words. They in the walls. I didn't. Do you know that when I accepted the job? Didn't. Do you know about the deaths? Didn't. Do you know about the isolation? Didn't. Do you know that Tillamook Rock Lighthouse, the structure they call Terrible Tilly, sitting a mile offshore from the Oregon coast, has been abandoned for good reason? I am a marine contractor, 42 years old, divorced, no kids, the kind of guy who takes jobs nobody else wants because the money is good and they got nothing tying me down. When the Preservation Society called about a 2-week inspection and maintenance contract on Tilly, I said yes before they finished explaining. $20,000, 2 weeks, how bad could it be? That was 4 months ago. I've been back on land for 3 months now, but part of me never left that rock. Part of me is still there, in the walls, listening to them scratch. Tillamook Rock is barely an acre of basalt jutting out of the Pacific Ocean. 1 mile from Tillamook Head, 1 mile from safety. The lighthouse was built in 1881. Took over a year. The construction was a nightmare. Storms, accidents, deaths. The first surveyor drowned before he even reached the rock. His body was never found. They say the ocean keeps what it takes out here. The lighthouse operated for 77 years. Automated in the 50s. Decommissioned in 1957. Too expensive. Too dangerous. Too many keepers went mad. Too many accidents that weren't really accidents. The place sat empty for decades. Then someone bought it, turned it into a columbarium, a repository for cremated remains. Thousands of urns, Thousands of dead people, stored in a lighthouse that already had a body count. That lasted until 1999. Then it was abandoned again. Too hard to maintain, too isolated, too cursed. But historic structures don't maintain themselves. Every few years, someone needs to check the building. Make sure it's not falling apart. Make sure the storms haven't torn it to pieces. That's where I came in. I took the helicopter out on a clear October morning. The pilot was nervous, kept checking the weather, kept saying the window was narrow, that we had maybe 3 hours before conditions deteriorated. He dropped me on the landing pad, a concrete platform barely big enough for the chopper. The rotor wash nearly knocked me over. He handed me supplies, food, water, tools, emergency radio. Then he lifted off. The sound of the engine faded, and suddenly I was alone. More alone than I'd ever been in my life. Just me and the rock and the endless Pacific stretching to the horizon. The lighthouse is a fortress, solid stone, built to withstand the worst the ocean could throw at it. Waves have been recorded hitting the lantern room 130 feet above sea level. 130 feet. Think about that. A wall of water tall enough to swallow a 10-story building. Slamming into this rock, again and again, for over a century. The place should have been destroyed long ago. But it stands. It always stands. The exterior was weathered, salt-stained, covered in bird droppings, but intact. I circled the structure, checked the foundation, the walls, the tower. Everything seemed solid. Then I opened the door. The metal had corroded. The hinges screamed, and the smell hit me. Decay, mold, salt, and something else, something organic, something wrong. The interior was dark. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealed rooms filled with debris, broken furniture, rusted equipment, and urns, hundreds of them, stacked on shelves, lined up against walls, each one containing someone's ashes, someone's remains, someone who be paid to spend eternity in this godforsaken place. Some were brass, some were ceramic, some were simple wooden boxes, and some had fallen, shattered on the stone floor, ashes scattered, mixed with the dirt and the water and the decay. I was walking on dead people, breathing them. The Preservation Society had warned me about the columbarium, told me to be respectful, not to disturb anything, but they hadn't mentioned how many urns there were, how tightly packed, how wrong it felt to be surrounded by so much death. I started my inspection on the ground floor, checked the walls for cracks, the floor for water damage. Everything seemed stable, old, deteriorating, but not in immediate danger of collapse. I moved to the second floor. More urns, more debris, and something else. Scratches on the walls, deep gouges, like something with claws had tried to dig through solid stone. I ran my fingers over them. Recent. The edges weren't too weathered. Weren't too worn. Whatever made these marks had done it recently. In the years since the last inspection, I told myself it was animals. Birds, seals, something that had gotten inside during a storm. But the scratches were too deep, too deliberate, too purposeful. The third floor was worse. More scratches, and symbols, carved into the walls. Circles, spirals, patterns that made my eyes hurt to look at. Like they were vibrating, shifting, refusing to stay still. I took photos, documentation, evidence that something was wrong here. That maybe the building needed more than maintenance. Maybe it needed to be demolished, erased, forgotten. But that wasn't my call. I was just here to assess, to report, to collect my money and leave. I climbed to the lantern room, the top of the lighthouse, where the massive Fresnel lens had once rotated. Warning ships, saving lives. The lens was gone now, removed decades ago, but the room remained, a circular space with windows on all sides, offering a 360 view of the ocean. And that is where I found the keeper's log. It was tucked in a corner, wrapped in oilcloth, protected from the elements. I shouldn't have opened it. Should have left it for the Preservation Society, for historians, for people who get paid to deal with old documents. But curiosity got me. I unwrapped it carefully. The leather cover was stained, water damaged, but legible. The last entry was dated September 1957, 2 months before the lighthouse was decommissioned. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, desperate. It described sounds in the walls, scratching, movement, voices. The keeper, a man named Morrison, wrote about seeing figures in the fog. People who weren't there, people who couldn't be there. He wrote about the urns in the storage room, how they'd been moved, rearranged, opened. He wrote about ashes on the floor, forming shapes, forming words, forming warnings. The final entry was 3 sentences. The scratching is inside the walls now. They went out. They re in the walls. Then nothing. No signature, no explanation, just those words. And I understood why the lighthouse had been decommissioned so suddenly. Why Morrison had never worked as a keeper again. Why nobody wanted to maintain this place. It wasn't the storms. It wasn't the isolation. It was something else. Something that lived here. Something that had been here long before the lighthouse. Something that the urns had fed, had strengthened, had given form. Night fell fast. The sun dropped into the Pacific like a stone. And suddenly the darkness was complete. Total. My flashlight seemed pathetic against it. I was supposed to spend 2 weeks here. 14 nights. But I wasn't sure I'd survive one. I set up in the lantern room. Furthest point from the lower levels. From the urns. From the scratch walls. I had a sleeping bag. A camp stove. Enough food for the duration. I made coffee. Ate a protein bar. Tried to convince myself everything was fine. That the log was just the ramblings of a man who'd gone stir crazy. That isolation did things to people. Made them see things. Hear things. Believe things that weren't real. Then the scratching started. Faint at first. Coming from below. From the lower floors. From inside the walls. A sound like fingernails on stone. Deliberate. Rhythmic. Moving. Climbing. Getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight. Shone it down the spiral staircase. Nothing. Just darkness. Just the beam disappearing into the depths of the lighthouse. But the scratching continued. Louder now. And accompanied by something else. Whispers. Dozens of voices. All talking at once. All saying things I couldn't quite make out. Words that dissolved before I could understand them. I backed against the windows. The cold glass pressed against my shoulders. The ocean roared below. Waves crashing against the rock. Drowning out the whispers. But not the scratching. Nothing could drown out the scratching. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The sounds never stopped. They moved through the walls like water. Like smoke. Like something that existed between solid and liquid. Between real and imagined. Sometimes close. Sometimes distant. But always there. Always present. At dawn, when gray light finally crept through the windows, the sounds faded. Retreated. Went back to wherever they came from. I went downstairs. Needed to see. Needed to know if I imagined it. The urns on the second floor had been moved. Not all of them, just some, rearranged into patterns, into shapes that looked almost like letters, almost like words. I took photos. My hands were shaking so badly the images came out blurred. And on the walls, more scratches, fresh ones, dozens of them, covering every surface, overlapping, creating a texture that was more gouged than stone. I called the Preservation Society on the emergency radio, told them I needed extraction, told them the building was unstable, told them I'd completed enough of the inspection to write a report. They argued, said I'd only been there one night, said the contract was for 2 weeks, said the helicopter was expensive and they couldn't justify the cost without good reason. I told them about the scratches, the moved urns, the sounds. They went quiet. Then the coordinator said something that made my blood freeze. She said they had trouble with previous contractors, that some had refused to stay the full term, that one had been extracted after 3 days and never worked again, that another had stayed the full 2 weeks and never been the same, that he moved to Arizona, to the desert, as far from the ocean as he could get, and that he killed himself 2 years later, left a note saying he couldn't stop hearing them, couldn't stop feeling them, couldn't stop knowing that they were waiting for him to come back. The coordinator said she'd send the helicopter in 3 days. That was the earliest they could arrange. 3 more nights, 72 more hours. I wanted to refuse, wanted to tell them I'd swim to shore if I had to. But I needed the money, needed the career, needed to prove I wasn't weak, wasn't crazy. So I said yes, said I'd stay, said I'd finish the job. The coordinator wished me luck. The radio clicked off, and I was alone again, with the lighthouse, with the urns, with whatever was in the walls. I spent the day working, forced myself to focus, to complete the inspection, to document everything. I checked the exterior again, photographed damage, took measurements, wrote notes, professional, thorough, normal, but I couldn't stop glancing at the walls. Couldn't stop listening for scratches. Couldn't stop feeling like I was being watched. By the end of the day, I completed about 60% of the work. Not bad. Another 2 days and I'd be done. Then I could leave, could collect my payment, could forget this place, could pretend I'd never seen the keeper's log, never heard the whispers, never felt the presence of something old and hungry and patient. The second night was worse. The scratching started earlier, before sunset, while there was still light. Like whatever was in the walls had grown bolder, grown stronger. The whispers were louder too, and this time I could make out words. Names, hundreds of names, all different, all spoken in different voices. Male, female, young, old, and I realized what I was hearing. The urns, the cremated remains. They were awake, aware, angry. They'd been promised eternal rest in a lighthouse on a rock in the Pacific. But there was no rest here. Only isolation, only darkness, only the endless pounding of waves and the slow erosion of time. They wanted out, wanted release, wanted someone to take them from this place. And I was the first living person they'd seen in months. Maybe years. The scratching intensified, grew frantic, desperate. I could hear them moving inside the walls now. Not just scratching, but pressing, pushing, trying to break through. The stone groaned, creaked, like a ship in a storm. Like something under pressure it was never designed to withstand. I grabbed my radio, called the Preservation Society. No answer. Called again. Static. The equipment was working. I could see the indicator lights. But nobody was responding. Like the signal couldn't reach the mainland. Like the rock had become its own world. Cut off, isolated, trapped. A section of wall on the third floor collapsed inward. Just gave way. Centuries-old stone crumbling like sand. And behind it, behind the wall, a hollow space. A cavity that shouldn't exist. Filled with something that looked like ash but moved like liquid. It poured out, spilled across the floor, formed shapes. Human shapes, dozens of them. All reaching, all grasping, all trying to touch me. To grab me, to pull me into that hollow space where they'd been imprisoned. I ran, up the spiral stairs, to the lantern room, slammed the metal door, braced it with my equipment, my supplies, anything heavy enough to hold. The shapes followed. I could hear them on the stairs, could hear the wet sliding sound of ash that was an fish climbing toward me. Could hear them whispering my name, a name they shouldn't, a name I'd never spoken aloud on this rock. They pressed against the door. The metal buckled, bent, but held, barely. I sat with my back against it, adding my weight, my strength, my will. The whispers continued. All night, hundreds of voices, thousands. Every person whose remains had been stored here. Every soul that had been promised peace and found only torment. They told me their stories. Who they'd been. How they'd died. Why they'd chosen this place. And they told me what they'd become. Prisoners. Echoes. Fragments of consciousness trapped in ash and stone and salt. Unable to move on. Unable to rest. Unable to do anything but scratch and whisper and wait for someone to help them. Or to join them. Dawn came. The pressure on the door eased. The whispers faded. I opened it carefully, ready to slam it shut again. But the stairs were empty. The ash was gone. Everything looked normal. Like nothing had happened. Like I imagined the entire night. But the collapsed wall was real. The hollow space was real. And when I looked inside it, when I shone my light into that cavity, I saw more hollow spaces, more cavities. The entire lighthouse was riddled with them. Like termite tunnels, like a nest. The walls weren't solid stone. They were honeycomb, filled with spaces where the ash could move, where the dead could hide, where they could watch and wait and grow stronger with each new urn that was added to the collection. I spent that day preparing, gathering my equipment, consolidating supplies, making sure I could last one more night, one more round with whatever lived in the walls. The helicopter would come tomorrow. Had to come tomorrow. I'd done enough work to justify extraction, to write a report, to recommend immediate demolition, to warn future contractors, to make sure nobody else ended up like Morrison, like the man who moved to Arizona. Like me, I knew I'd never be the same after this. Knew that the scratching would follow me, that the whispers would echo in my dreams, that I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, checking walls, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. The third night was the worst. They didn't wait for darkness, didn't wait for me to settle in. The moment the sun touched the horizon, they came. All of them. Every ash shape, every fragment, every imprisoned soul. The lighthouse shook. The walls cracked. The foundation groaned. They weren't just trying to reach me anymore. They were trying to bring the entire structure down, to destroy their prison, to free themselves even if it meant destroying everything, including me. I held on, braced myself, prayed to gods I didn't believe in, and waited for morning, for the helicopter, for salvation. It came at dawn, the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Rotor blades cutting through ocean air. I grabbed my pack, my radio, left everything else, ran to the landing pad. The pilot saw my face and didn't ask questions, just gestured for me to get in. We lifted off, The lighthouse shrank beneath us, a dark fortress on a darker rock. Still standing, still waiting, still full of the dead who couldn't rest. I never filed a complete report. Told the Preservation Society the structure was too far gone, too dangerous, too costly to repair. Recommended it be left to the ocean. Let the waves take it. Let it crumble. Let the dead finally be free. They accepted my assessment, paid me in full. The lighthouse still stands, still abandoned, still full of urns and ash and hollow spaces in the walls. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind comes from the west, I swear I can hear them. The scratching, the whispers, the voices of thousands calling from a rock a mile offshore. Calling my name, reminding me that I left them there. That I escaped, but they never will. That someday, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 50 years, I'll go back. Everyone goes back eventually. The ocean keeps what it takes. And Terrible Tilly never lets go. Story 4. Face in the mist. I saw her face in the waterfall 3 days before my daughter disappeared. And I need someone to understand the connection before it is too late for both of us. Multnomah Falls is the most visited natural site in Oregon. 620 feet of water cascading down a basalt cliff face in the Columbia River Gorge. 2 million tourists every year. Selfies on the bridge. Families taking photos. Couples holding hands. Everyone sees the water, the power, the beauty. But some of us see something else. Something that has been waiting in that mist for over 100 years. My name is Robert. I am 51 years old. Divorced. I have a 16-year-old daughter named Emma. Last month, I took her to Multnomah Falls for her birthday. She'd never been. Can you believe that? Born and raised in Portland. And she'd never seen the most famous waterfall in the state. I wanted to give her something memorable, something special. I succeeded, just not in the way I intended. We arrived around noon. The parking lot was packed. Tour buses lined up like train cars. People everywhere, speaking a dozen different languages. The trail to the bridge was crowded, slow moving. Emma was on her phone, texting friends, barely looking at the scenery. I remember feeling frustrated, wondering why I bothered, thinking about how disconnected we become since the divorce. The bridge sits at the base of the upper falls. It arches over Multnomah Creek where the water crashes down from above before continuing its descent to the lower falls. The view is spectacular. The sound is deafening. The mist rolls off the water in thick clouds, soaking everyone who stands there. Emma finally put her phone away, finally looked up, and that is when I saw her face. Not Emma's face, the other face, the one in the water. It appeared for just a moment. A woman, whose features formed in the mist and spray. High cheekbones, long dark hair, eyes that seemed to look directly at me. Then the wind shifted and she was gone, dissolved back into white water and foam. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, told myself it was pareidolia, the human brain, its tendency to see faces in random patterns. We see faces in clouds, in wood grain, in the texture of walls. It doesn't mean anything. It's just neurons firing, pattern recognition gone haywire. But I knew what I'd seen, and more importantly, I knew the legend, the White Lady of Multnomah Falls, the story every local grows up hearing. A young Native American woman who threw herself from the cliff to save her village from a plague. Sacrifice, love, tragedy, the classic elements of myth. And like all good myths, it was rooted in something real. Something that happened long before anyone built parking lots or tourist facilities or Instagram-perfect viewpoints. Emma didn't see the face. She was taking photos, adjusting angles, trying to get the perfect shot. I didn't mention it. Didn't want to scare her. Didn't want her to think her dad was losing his mind. So I smiled, took my own photos. We hiked to the top of the falls, had lunch at the lodge, drove home. A normal day, a good day. Father and daughter spending time together. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the face. I researched the legend online, found dozens of accounts, people who'd seen her over the years. Always in the mist, always just for a moment. Some described her as beautiful, peaceful, a protective spirit watching over the falls. Others described her differently, angry, vengeful, searching for something she'd lost. One account caught my attention. A blog post from 2012. A man described seeing the White Lady 3 days before his son went missing. The boy was 17, went for a hike in Forest Park and never came back. They found his backpack near a creek, found his phone on a trail, but no body, no evidence of what happened. Just gone. The man was convinced the White Lady had taken his son, claimed she appears as a warning, a mark, that once you see her, she has chosen you. or chosen someone you love. The post ended abruptly. No follow-up, no resolution, just a father's desperate attempt to make sense of tragedy. I told myself it was grief, paranoia, the human need to find patterns in chaos. But I couldn't shake the feeling, the certainty that seeing that face meant something, that it was connected to Emma somehow. 3 days later, Emma asked if she could go hiking with friends. Mount Hood. Standard trail. They'd done it before. I said yes, told her to be careful, to check in every few hours, to be back before dark. She rolled her eyes, told me I worried too much, hugged me, left. She didn't check in. First hour passed, then second. I called. No answer. Texted. No response. By hour 4, I was calling her friends, their parents, anyone who might know where she was. They all said the same thing. The hike was canceled. Emma never showed up. Nobody had seen her since that morning. I reported her missing that night. Police took it seriously. Teenage girl, no history of running away. Phone going straight to voicemail. They started searching immediately. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers combing the trails. But Mount Hood is massive. Dense forest, deep ravines, 1,000 places to disappear. Day 2, they found her car, parked at a trailhead near Multnomah Falls. Not Mount Hood, the falls. She lied about where she was going. And her car was empty. Keys in the ignition, phone on the passenger seat, backpack in the trunk, like she just stepped out for a moment and planned to return. I went to the falls, stood on the bridge where we'd been 3 days earlier. Searched the mist for that face, for any sign, for any answer. And I saw her again, the white lady. But this time she wasn't just a face in the spray. She was standing at the top of the falls, at the edge of the cliff, looking down at me. She was solid, real, wearing a white dress that moved in wind I couldn't feel. Her hair was long, black, hanging past her waist, and her face was the same one I'd seen in the mist. Beautiful, terrible, ancient. She raised her arm, pointed at me, then she stepped backward, off the cliff, falling. Her dress billowed around her like wings. And when she hit the pool at the base of the upper falls, she didn't splash. She just vanished, absorbed by the water, becoming part of it. I ran to the top, took the trail at a dead sprint, pushed past tourists, ignored the shouts telling me to slow down. When I reached the observation point at the summit, I searched the edge, looked for any sign of where she'd been standing. And I found something. Footprints, small, bare, pressed into the wet earth right at the cliff, this edge. They were fresh, recent, and next to them, I found something else. Emma's bracelet, the one I'd given her for her 13th birthday. Silver chain, small charm in the shape of a bird. She never took it off. The police collected it, treated it as evidence, expanded the search around the falls. But they found nothing. No body, no trail, no indication of where Emma had gone. Just that bracelet and those impossible footprints. That night, I dreamed. I was standing in the pool at the base of the falls. The water was clear, crystal clear, and at the bottom, maybe 40 feet down, I could see faces. Dozens of them, hundreds, pressed against the rocks, trapped, screaming silently, and among them, I saw Emma. Her eyes were open, her mouth was moving, trying to tell me something, trying to warn me. I woke up choking, gasping, water pouring from my mouth and nose. Real water, cold, tasting of minerals and moss. I coughed it out, soaked my sheets, my pillows. My bedroom floor was covered in puddles. The next morning, I went back to the falls. Early, before the crowds, before the tour buses. The place was deserted. Just me and the sound of water and the faces I knew were watching from the mist. I crossed the bridge, stood in the exact spot where Emma and I had taken photos 5 days earlier. And I called out to the white lady, begged her to give Emma back, offered myself instead, promised anything, everything, just let my daughter go. The waterfall changed. The sound shifted, got deeper, more rhythmic, like words spoken in a language I almost recognized. And the mist formed shapes. Not just faces now, whole bodies, dozens of figures standing in the spray. All women, all young, all staring at me with expressions of infinite sadness. Then I understood. The legend was wrong. The white lady didn't throw herself from the falls to save her village. She was pushed, murdered, cast down by men who feared her power, who wanted to silence her voice. And her death created something. A presence, a force that pulls other young women to this place. That collects them, keeps them, adds them to the chorus of voices crying out from the water. Emma wasn't taken. She was called, summoned by something that's been waiting at these falls for over a century. Something that feeds on grief, on loss, on the desperation of parents who do anything to see their children again. I felt the pull then, the same call Emma must have heard, a voice inside my head. Not words, just emotion. Come, join, stay. The water looked inviting, peaceful. The mist felt warm on my face. One step forward, one step onto the railing, one step into empty air. That was all it would take, but I didn't. To jump, I grabbed the railing with both hands, held on, forced myself to breathe, to think, to resist, and slowly, the feeling faded. The voice went quiet. The mist returned to normal. Just water, just spray, just a waterfall. When I opened my eyes, I saw something on the bridge deck. A message, written in water that hadn't evaporated. Letters formed by wet footprints. Small, bare, the same prints I'd seen at the cliff's edge. 16, that is how many we are now. The water dried as I watched. The message disappeared. But I understood. 16 women, 16 victims, 16 voices trapped in the falls. And Emma was the newest addition. I've been researching missing persons cases near Multnomah Falls, going back decades, centuries if records exist. What I've found terrifies me. Young women disappearing near the falls going back to the 1800s. Not every year, not even every decade, but consistently, regularly. A pattern nobody noticed because the cases were spread out. Different jurisdictions, different eras, different explanations, but they were all connected, all linked to the White Lady, all part of whatever curse or presence inhabits that water. I returned to the falls again yesterday, brought flowers, said a prayer, told Emma I loved her, that I was sorry, that I failed to protect her. The White Lady appeared one more time. Not in the mist, not at the cliff. Said she was standing next to me on the bridge. Close enough to touch, I could see every detail of her face. The sadness in her eyes. The anger. The pain. She looked at me with something like pity. Then she placed her hand on my chest. Right over my heart. The cold went through me like electricity. I saw flashes. Images. Emma standing at the top of the falls. Looking down. Smiling. Then stepping forward. Falling. Not fighting. Not scared. Just accepting. Like it was meant to be. Like she'd been waiting for this her whole life. When the vision ended, the White Lady was gone. But something remained. A weight in my chest. A presence. I can feel it now as I am telling you this. Something that wasn't there before. Something that is growing, spreading, taking root. I'm going to return to Multnomah Falls tomorrow. I'm going to stand on that bridge one more time. And I am going to listen to the voice in the water. Because I finally understand, the White Lady doesn't want victims. She wants witnesses, people who see, who understand, who can tell the story. And once you've been marked, once you've seen her face, once she has touched you, you become part of the cycle. Emma is still there, in the water, in the mist, part of the 16. And soon, I'll join her. Not because I'm jumping, but because whatever the White Lady placed inside me is changing me, pulling me toward the falls, making me one of them. If you visit Multnomah Falls, dawn, to look too long at the mist. Dawn, to search for faces in the spray. And if you see a woman in white standing at the cliff's edge, turn around. Leave. Dawn, to try to help. Dawn, to try to understand. Because once she sees you, once she marks you, there is no escape. You were already part of her collection, already counted among the lost, already destined to become another face in the eternal mist. Story 5. Stone Ritual. I found my brother's journal inside the witch's castle 3 weeks after the Portland Police Department stopped looking for him. And what I read in those pages made me understand that some people don't want to be found. The castle I sent, really a castle. It's a stone ruin hidden deep in Forest Park, about 2 miles up the Wildwood Trail from the nearest parking area. Most people who hike past it think it is the remains of an old ranger station or maybe some rich person's abandoned estate from the early 1900s. But the locals know better. The structure dates back to the 1850s, built by a man named Danford Balch who murdered his daughter, his lover, and then hanged for it on the same property where he built his dream home. 2 families destroyed, multiple deaths, over 170 years of rage and grief soaking into those stones. And my brother Derek had been obsessed with it for the last 6 months of his life. I am a contractor from Beaverton, 42 years old, divorced, no kids. Derek was my younger brother by 3 years, and he was the successful one. Software engineer at Intel, nice house in the West Hills. engaged to a woman who actually seemed to love him. He had everything going right, which made his disappearance even more incomprehensible. He called me 2 weeks before he vanished, voice shaking with excitement, telling me he discovered something important about the witch's castle. Something that explained all the paranormal activity people reported there. He wanted to show me, wanted me to see it with my own eyes. I told him I was busy with a job in Lake Oswego and maybe next month. He said it couldn't wait that long. Said if he was right, everything we thought we knew about the place was wrong. That was our last conversation. 3 days later, his fiancée reported him missing. His car was found in the Lower Maclay parking lot, the trailhead for Forest Park. His phone was on the driver's seat, battery dead. Police searched the trails for a week, brought in dogs, checked every abandoned structure in the 5,000-acre park. Nothing. Derek had simply walked into the forest and disappeared. I started my own search after the official one ended. Spent every weekend hiking Forest Park, checking places the police might have missed. I talked to other hikers, to the homeless people who sometimes camp in the deeper woods, to the teenagers who go to the witch's castle at night for parties and alleged satanic rituals. No one had seen Derek, but several people told me they'd been avoiding the castle lately. Said it felt different, worse, like something that had been sleeping there for a long time had woken up hungry. The journal was tucked into a crack in the stone wall, wrapped in plastic to protect it from rain. I almost missed it. Would have missed it if I hadn't been running my hands over every inch of those ruins, desperate for any sign my brother had been there. Derek's handwriting filled every page, growing increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. He'd been researching the witch's castle, its history obsessively. Not just the famous Danford Balch murder, but everything that had happened on that land before and after. And he discovered something the history books left out. The property wasn't just the site of one murder, it was the site of dozens, maybe hundreds. Before Balch built his homestead there in the 1850s, the area had been used by early settlers as an execution ground. Public hangings, burnings, the kind of frontier justice that didn't get recorded in official documents because it was often applied to people the community wanted to forget. Accused witches, Native Americans, Chinese immigrants, anyone who didn't fit, anyone who threatened the social order. Balch had built his home on top of a mass grave without knowing it. And when he murdered his daughter's lover, when he himself was hanged, he just added to the body count. Added his rage to all the other rage that had soaked into that ground over decades. Derek's research had led him to old newspaper archives, to private collections of letters and journals from Portland's founding families. He found references to rituals performed at the site, not modern occult nonsense, but something older, something the early settlers had brought with them from Europe and adapted to the New World. They'd been trying to bind something, to keep it contained, and according to Derek's increasingly frantic notes, they failed. The final entry in the journal was dated the day before he disappeared. He'd written that he was going to the witch's castle at midnight, that he needed to see if the presence he'd been sensing there was real or just his imagination running wild, that he figured out how to communicate with it, how to prove its existence. And then, in handwriting so shaky it was barely legible, he'd written something that made my blood run cold. It knows my name. It's been calling me for weeks. Tonight I'm gonna answer. I should have taken the journal to the police. Should have shown them Derek's research and let professionals handle it. But I'd already seen how seriously they took reports of paranormal activity. They'd write it off as evidence of a mental breakdown, assumed Derek had wandered off in a delusional state and died of exposure somewhere in the 5,000 acres of forest. I needed to understand what he found. Needed to see the witch's castle at night, the way Derek had seen it. So I went back after dark. Forest Park becomes a different place when the sun goes down. The trails that seem peaceful and well-maintained during the day turn into narrow corridors through absolute blackness. The sounds change. The normal bird calls and rustling leaves are replaced by things you can identify. Movements just beyond the reach of your flashlight. Breathing that might be wind through branches or might be something else. I hiked the Wildwood Trail a dozen times in daylight. At night, with only my headlamp and a handheld flashlight, it felt completely unfamiliar. The 2 miles to the witch's castle took over an hour, and by the time I arrived, my nerves were shot from jumping at every sound, every shadow that moved wrong. The ruins looked smaller at night, less impressive. Just a semicircle of stone walls, maybe 20 feet across, open to the sky, surrounded by dense forest. Graffiti covered every surface. Beer cans and cigarette butts littered the ground. During the day, it looked like exactly what it was, a place where bored teenagers came to drink and tell ghost stories. At night, with my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, it looked like a mouth. A stone mouth waiting to swallow anyone stupid enough to step inside. I stood at the edge for a long time, working up the courage to enter. I am not a superstitious person, never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that, but standing there in the dark, feeling the temperature drop as cold air flowed out of the ruins like breath, I understood why people throughout history had believed in haunted places. Some locations just feel wrong. I stepped inside. The stone walls seemed to amplify the darkness, creating shadows my flashlight couldn't penetrate. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. My breath came out in visible clouds despite it being a mild October night. And I heard it, a sound like wind, but with rhythm, with cadence, almost like words in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood on a level deeper than conscious thought. It was calling, not to me specifically, to anyone, to everyone. An invitation and a command rolled into one. I found the symbols carved into the north wall. Fresh carvings, the stone still pale where someone had chipped away the weathered surface. They looked vaguely Celtic, mixed with other designs I didn't recognize. And they were arranged in a circle around a name carved deeper than the rest. Derek Morrison, my brother. His name. His full name, cut into the stone with what must have been hours of careful work. Underneath it, in smaller letters, were words in English. A message, or a warning. The bound must bind. The called must answer. The named must pay. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. Derek had carved his own name into these walls, had performed some kind of ritual here, had offered himself to whatever presence inhabited this place. The question was why? What could have possessed him to do something so obviously dangerous? What had he hoped to accomplish? I found the answer in the center of the ruins. A flat stone that might have been part of a floor once, now mostly covered in dirt and moss. But someone had recently cleared it, scraped away years of accumulated debris to reveal more carvings underneath. Not symbols this time. Names. Dozens of names. Hundreds maybe, carved over each other, layered so thick in places the stone had been worn smooth. Every person who died on this ground, every execution, every murder, every victim, their names had been recorded in the stone itself, carved by hands unknown, preserved for reasons I couldn't fathom. And at the edge of this mass of names, freshly carved, was Derek's name again. He added himself to the list, voluntarily, consciously. He stood in this place and carved his own name into the stone memorial of the dead. The breathing sound grew louder, closer, and I realized it wasn't coming from the walls or the forest around me. It was coming from below, from under the stone, from whatever lay beneath this structure. I ran, dropped my flashlight and ran through the darkness, bouncing off trees, tripping over roots, my headlamp beam jumping wildly as I sprinted down the trail toward the parking lot. Behind me I could hear something moving, not following, just acknowledging, a sound like laughter mixed with wind. I made it to my truck, hands bloody from falls, lungs burning, and sat there shaking until sunrise. When dawn finally came and the forest didn't seem quite so malevolent, I drove home and spent the next 3 days trying to convince myself I imagined everything. But I couldn't explain the photographs on my phone. I'd taken pictures of the journal entries, of the symbols on the wall, of Derek's name carved into the stone. They were all real, all there, proof that whatever I experienced wasn't just panic and imagination. I went back to the journal, reading it more carefully this time. Derek had been researching binding rituals, the idea that you could contain malevolent entities by offering them something they wanted more than freedom. Names had power in old magic. Knowing something, this true name gave you control over it, but giving your name voluntarily, carving it into a place of power, reversed that equation. You weren't binding the entity. You were binding yourself to it. Derek had figured out what was under the this castle. Some presence that had been feeding on death and rage for almost 2 centuries. Something that had been bound by the early settlers but never destroyed. Just contained, forced to wait and grow stronger with every execution, every murder, every drop of blood spilled on that ground. And it called to certain people. People who were sensitive. People who were searching for meaning or purpose or just acknowledgement that there was something more to existence than the mundane reality we all inhabited. Derek had heard it calling, had spent months researching, trying to understand what it was, and in the end, he decided to answer, to offer himself willingly, to add his name to the collection of the dead and join whatever existed beneath those stones. The police found his body 3 months later, during a routine trail maintenance project. He was buried about 100 yards from the witch's castle, in a shallow depression that had filled with leaves and debris. No signs of foul play, no obvious cause of death. The medical examiner ruled it exposure combined with possible substance use, though no drugs were found in his system. His fiancée held a memorial service. Our mother flew in from Arizona. Everyone talked about what a tragedy it was, how Derek had so much to live for, how his death was such a senseless waste. But I knew better. Derek's death wasn't senseless. It was intentional, calculated. He'd gone to the witch's castle knowing exactly what would happen. He carved his name into those stones as an offering, a payment, a way of joining something he spent months studying and maybe understanding better than anyone else ever had. The question that haunts me, Isen, why he did it. I think I understand that much. Derek had always been searching for something beyond the ordinary. Some proof that existence had depth and meaning beyond career and marriage and the slow march toward comfortable middle age. The question is whether he found what he was looking for, whether whatever is under the witch's castle gave him what he wanted in exchange for his name, his life, his voluntary sacrifice. I go back sometimes, not to the ruins themselves. I can't bring myself to enter them again. But I hike to the area and sit on a fallen log about 50 yards away, close enough to see the stones but far enough that I dawn to feel that breathing presence, that invitation to step inside and add my own name to the collection. And on quiet nights when the wind moves through the trees just right, I swear I can hear Derek. Not calling for help, not in pain, just there, present, part of something larger than himself. Part of the stone in the ground and the accumulated history of death and binding that makes the witch's castle what it is. The locals say you can see figures moving in the ruins after dark. That rituals still happen there, performed by people who dawn to fully understand what they re-invoking. That the place grows stronger every year, feeding on the fear and curiosity of everyone who visits. I believe him. I believe all of it now. And I understand why Derek carved his name into the stone. Why he offered himself willingly. Because some things are worse than death. Some forms of existence are just different. Not necessarily better or worse, but different in ways we can comprehend until we re-part of them. The witch's castle still stands in Forest Park. Still draws visitors every day. Most leave thinking it's just an old stone ruin with a creepy name and some local folklore attached. A few leave feeling unsettled, sensing something they can't quite name. And a very few, the ones who are sensitive enough to hear the calling, never leave at all. They carve their names into the stone and join whatever waits beneath. They bind themselves willingly to something that has been collecting names and souls for almost 200 years. My brother, his name is on that wall, among hundreds of others. And on quiet nights, when I can sleep, I wonder if adding my name would be surrender or reunion. If I'd be giving up on life or joining Derek in whatever existence he found beneath those stones. I haven't decided yet, but I keep his journal, keep the photographs, keep driving to Forest Park on weekends, sitting on that fallen log, listening to the wind through the trees that sounds almost like breathing, almost like calling, almost like my name. Story 6. The thing I saw on Mount Hood wasn't Bigfoot. And I need you to understand that distinction before I tell you what happened. Because what is out there in those forests is so much worse than any legend you've heard. I am a wildlife biologist. Name is Marcus, 49 years old. I've spent 25 years studying animal behavior in the Pacific Northwest. Bears, elk, mountain lions. I know what lives in these forests. I know their sounds, their movements, their patterns. What I encountered 3 weeks ago doesn't fit into any category. Doesn't match any species. And the fact that it is still out there, still hunting, still watching, means nobody is safe on that mountain. The expedition was supposed to be routine. Forest Service contracted me to investigate reports of unusual animal activity on the northwest face of Mount Hood. Hikers hearing strange sounds, wildlife behaving erratically, deer carcasses found in trees, standard stuff for large predator activity. I figured cougar, maybe a particularly aggressive bear. I went in alone. Stupid decision. But I've done solo trips dozens of times. I know the terrain, know how to handle myself. I packed for 5 days. Set up base camp at 6,000 feet. Right at the tree line where old-growth forest meets alpine meadow. First night was quiet. Too quiet. That should have been my warning. The forest has a sound. A constant background noise of insects and birds and small mammals moving through undergrowth. But that night, there was nothing. Complete silence. Like every living thing had fled. I woke at 4 in the morning to a sound I had never heard before. Low frequency, below the range of normal hearing. I didn't hear it so much as feel it. A vibration in my chest, in my bones, in my teeth. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped, leaving behind a ringing in my ears and a feeling of dread so intense I had to force myself to breathe. I grabbed my thermal imaging camera, scanned the tree line, found nothing. No heat signatures, no movement, just cold forest and that oppressive silence. At dawn, I found the first track, maybe 200 yards from my tent, in soft earth near a stream. The print was massive, 18 inches long, 7 inches wide, 5 distinct toes, but the proportions were wrong. Too elongated, too heavy. The depth of the impression suggested something weighing over 1,000 pounds. For comparison, an adult male grizzly weighs around 600 pounds and leaves a track maybe 12 inches long. This wasn't a bear. Wasn't anything I recognized. The stride length between prints was over 7 feet. Whatever made these tracks was walking upright and stood at least 12 feet tall. I took photos, measurements, made a plaster cast, professional documentation, but my hands were shaking because I knew what hikers had been reporting. Colossal humanoids, giants in the forest, creatures that made Bigfoot sightings seem quaint by comparison. I followed the tracks. They led deeper into old growth, into sections of forest that see maybe one human visitor per year. The trees here are ancient. Douglas firs over 200 feet tall, western red cedars with trunks wider than my tent. And between them, darkness. The canopy is so thick that noon looks like twilight. 3 miles in, I found the tree. A Douglas fir that had been stripped of bark from ground level to about 15 feet up. Long vertical gouges, deep, deliberate. And at the top of the stripped section, a mark. Carved into the wood, a symbol I didn't recognize. Geometric, intentional, not random damage. Something with intelligence had marked this tree, claimed this territory, left a warning. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. And I am a scientist. I needed to understand, needed to document, needed proof. The hum started again around 3 in the afternoon. Stronger this time, longer. I felt it in my spine, in my skull. It made my vision blur, made my stomach turn, and underneath the vibration, I heard something else. A voice, not words, not language, just vocalization. Deep, resonant, coming from multiple directions at once. I activated my audio equipment. High-end recorders capable of capturing infrasound and ultrasound, frequencies below and above human hearing range. The needles went crazy, peaking, maxing out. Whatever was making that sound was producing energy across the entire spectrum. Then I saw movement through the trees, maybe 100 yards away. Something massive, dark, moving between trunks with impossible silence for its size. I raised my camera, zoomed in, tried to focus. It stepped into a shaft of sunlight, just for a moment, but long enough for me to see. Bipedal, 12 feet tall, minimum, covered in dark hair, but not like an ape, more like thick fur, almost black. Its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, torso too broad, head too large, and when it turned toward me, I saw its face. Not ape-like, not human, something else, something older. High forehead, deep-set eyes that caught the light and reflected it back. Amber, glowing, and an expression I can only describe as awareness. Intelligence, recognition. It knew I was there, knew I was watching, and it didn't care. The creature raised one arm, pointed at me, then opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't the hum. It was a roar, but deeper, layered, like multiple voices screaming at once. The force of it knocked me backward, made my ears ring, made my nose bleed. I ran, didn't document, just ran, crashed through undergrowth, branches tearing at my face, roots trying to trip me, and behind me, I heard it following. Not running, walking, steady, patient, like it knew I couldn't escape. I made it maybe half a mile before I realized I was going the wrong direction. Deeper into the forest, away from camp, away from any trail. The trees were so thick I couldn't see the sky. Couldn't orient myself. I was lost, and it was still following. I found a hollow beneath a fallen cedar. Crawled inside. Tried to control my breathing. Tried to think. My radio was back at camp. My GPS unit had died. Battery drained despite being fully charged that morning. Same thing that happened to the park ranger at Tunnel 13. Same electromagnetic interference. The footsteps got closer, slow, methodical. I could hear branches breaking, could feel the vibration of its weight through the ground. Then silence. It had stopped. Right outside my hiding place. I held my breath, closed my eyes, prayed to anything that might be listening. And I felt it, heat, radiating from something massive standing just feet away. I could smell it, musk and earth and something else. Something ancient, like opening a cave sealed for millennia. Then it made a sound. Softer this time. Not a roar, more like a rumble. And I understood. It was communicating. Not with me, with others. Calling them, gathering them. I heard responses from 3 directions. The same low rumble. 3 more of them, at least. Maybe more. They were surrounding me, coordinating, hunting in a pack. The hollow I was hiding in suddenly felt like a trap. I had to move, had to try. I waited until the footsteps moved away. Then I crawled out, picked a direction, ran. I don't remember much of the next hour. Just running, falling, getting up, running more. The forest became a blur. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But fear kept me moving. Pure animal terror. I burst out of the tree line at dusk. Found myself in an alpine meadow. Open ground. Nowhere to hide. And behind me, emerging from the forest, I saw them. 4 of them, standing in a line, watching, waiting. They didn't follow me into the open. Just stood there, at the edge of the trees. Like they had a boundary, a rule. They hunted in the forest. But not in exposed areas. Not where they could be seen clearly. I backed away slowly, keeping them in sight. They tracked my movement, heads turning in unison, coordinated, synchronized. Then the largest one raised both arms above its head, and the hum started again. All 4 of them were producing it. The sound was overwhelming, physical. I felt my heartbeat sync with the rhythm, felt my thoughts getting fuzzy, my vision dimming. They were doing something to me, affecting me neurologically, using infrasound as a weapon. I forced myself to move, stumbled toward what I hoped was the trail. The hum followed me, grew stronger. I collapsed twice, got up twice, finally saw the trail marker. Civilization, safety. I ran until I couldn't to hear the hum anymore. Ran until I reached the parking lot. Collapsed next to my truck. Forest Service picked me up 3 hours later. I was hypothermic, dehydrated, delirious. They said I'd been missing for 2 days, but I'd only been gone for 1. Somehow, I lost 24 hours. My equipment was never recovered. My tent, my cameras, my recordings, all gone. When they went back to look, they found my campsite destroyed, torn apart, everything scattered, but no footprints, no evidence of what had done it. The photos on my camera survived. I had it in my pocket. But when I reviewed them, the images were distorted, blurred, static, except for one, a single clear shot of the creature, looking directly at the camera, directly at me. And in its eyes, I saw something that still haunts me. Recognition, intelligence, and a message, a warning. This is our territory, our domain, and humans are no longer welcome. Mount Hood has over 600 square miles of wilderness, old-growth forest that has never been logged, areas where humans rarely venture. And in those forests, something lives, something ancient, something that has been there far longer than we have. The Forest Service classified my report, buried it, called it a bear encounter, stress-induced hallucination. They don't want people to know what is up there. Don't want panic. Don't want questions they can to answer. But I know the truth. Those creatures are real. They re-territorial. They re-intelligent. And they re-making themselves known. The encounters are increasing. Hikers go missing every year on Mount Hood. Some are found. Most errant, and the ones who are found can explain what happened. Can? To remember, just lost time and a feeling of being watched. I haven't been back to the mountain. Can bring myself to return. But I still hear the hum. Late at night, when everything is quiet, I feel it in my chest, in my bones. And I know they remember me. No, I'm marked somehow. Connected to them. Last week, I found a track in my backyard. I live 50 miles from Mount Hood, in the suburbs. And there it was, 18 inches long, 7 inches wide, 5 toes, fresh, pressed deep into the mud. They know where I am. They re-watching. And someday, When I least expect it, I'll hear that hum again. And this time, there won't be any open meadow to run to, any boundary to cross, any escape. The colossal humanoids of Mount Hood are real, and they be coming down from the mountain. Story 7. Warning on Highway 30, the boy appeared in my headlights exactly 3 seconds before I would have hit the girl, and that impossible timing is what convinced me I'd seen something that shouldn't to exist. I drive a semi for a living, 18-wheeler hauling freight up and down the West Coast, and they logged over 2 million miles in the past 15 years without a single accident. I know how to handle a truck, know how to read the road, know the difference between a deer frozen in my high beams and something that doesn't belong there. The boy didn't belong there. It was a Friday night in late September, just past 11. I was heading east on the historic Columbia River Highway, the old scenic route that winds along the Oregon side of the gorge. Most drivers take I-84 now, the faster modern highway that runs parallel, but I've been dealing with a load of delicate equipment that couldn't handle the rougher interstate. The old highway is slower but smoother, and at that hour it is practically empty. The road curves through dense forest there, towering Douglas firs blocking out the stars, creating a tunnel of darkness broken only by my headlights. The Columbia River runs somewhere below to my right, invisible in the night but present in the way the air feels heavier, damper, carrying that mineral smell of deep water. I've been driving that stretch for years, knew every curve and straightaway, which is why I was doing about 45 in a 40 zone, comfortable and confident, my mind halfway between the road and the podcast playing through my speakers. Then the boy materialized directly in front of my truck. Not stepped out, not ran into view, materialized. 1 second the road was empty. The next he was there, standing in the center of my lane. One arm raised, his mouth open in what looked like a scream I couldn't to hear over my engine. I hit the brakes hard, felt the trailer start to jackknife behind me. The anti-lock system kicked in with that rapid stuttering pulse that means you right on the edge of losing control. My coffee cup flew off the dash, papers scattered everywhere, and through it all I kept my eyes locked on the boy, waiting for the impact, waiting to feel that sickening thud of metal meeting flesh. It never came. The truck stopped. The boy was gone, and standing about 20 feet ahead, exactly where my bumper would have been if I hadn't T-braked, was a little girl in a white dress holding a red rubber ball. She looked maybe 7 or 8 years old. Dark hair in pigtails, old-fashioned dress that reminded me of something from the 1950s. She wasn't moving, just standing there in my headlights, staring at my truck with eyes that reflected the light wrong, too bright, like an animal. Then she smiled, turned around, and walked straight into the forest on the left side of the road, disappearing into the trees like she had never been there at all. I sat in my cab for a full 5 minutes, heart hammering, hands shaking on the wheel. Cars don't materialize in front of trucks. Little girls don't appear in the middle of empty highways at midnight. And boys definitely don't vanish into thin air after forcing you to make an emergency stop. But I seen what I seen. Both of them, clear as day in my headlights. Real enough that I nearly wrecked my rig trying to avoid them. I got out to check the road, to look for evidence, footprints, anything. The pavement was empty. No marks. No signs anyone had been there. The forest on both sides was impenetrable darkness. The kind of dense Pacific Northwest growth where you can see more than a few feet into the trees even in daylight. I climbed back in my cab and continued driving, but slower now, more careful. Watching for anything unusual. My hands were still shaking when I pulled into a truck stop in Hood River 40 minutes later. The waitress at the diner, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and tired eyes, noticed something was off when I ordered coffee. Asked if I was okay. I told her what I'd seen. Described the boy appearing in my headlights. The girl with the ball. The way they both vanished. Her expression changed, went from concern to something else. Something knowing and sad. She asked exactly where on Highway 30 it had happened. I gave her the mile marker, as close as I could estimate. She nodded like I confirmed something she already suspected. Then she told me I wasn't the first driver to report seeing them. Not by a long shot. The story went back decades, she said, to 1957. A family had been driving the Columbia River Highway on a Friday night. Father, mother, and their 2 children, a boy who was 10 and a girl who was 7. They'd been coming back from visiting relatives in Portland, heading home to their farm in the gorge. The girl had been playing with a red rubber ball in the back seat. She dropped it, and it had rolled forward, wedging under the driver's seat. She unbuckled to retrieve it, and at that exact moment the father swerved to avoid something in the road. The car went off the highway, crashed through the guardrail, and tumbled down the embankment toward the river. The father and mother died on impact. The boy survived long enough to crawl from the wreckage and try to get help, but he bled out on the road before anyone found him. The girl was thrown from the car during the rollover. Her body was discovered 30 feet into the forest, still clutching her red ball. Since then, drivers on that stretch of Highway 30 reported seeing them on Friday nights. Always the same pattern. The boy appears first, trying to warn drivers to slow down. The girl appears after, standing in the road with her ball, marking the exact spot where the family's car had crashed. Some drivers saw them and stopped safely. Others didn't see them in time and had accidents, though nothing as bad as the original crash. A few drivers claimed they actually hit the girl, felt the impact, but when they stopped to check, there was nothing there. No body, no damage to their vehicles, just the memory of a little girl in a white dress vanishing under their bumper. The waitress told me I was lucky. Lucky the boy had appeared when he did. Lucky I had time to stop. She said the ghosts, if that is what they were, seemed to be trying to prevent other families from dying the same way. Trying to warn people about that dangerous curve where their father had lost control so many years ago. I wanted to dismiss it, wanted to chalk the whole thing up to exhaustion or maybe some kind of mass hallucination caused by the specific conditions of that stretch of road. But I couldn't explain what I'd seen. Couldn't explain the boy appearing exactly when I needed to slow down, or the girl standing exactly where my truck would have been if I hadn't stopped. I finished my coffee and got back on the road, but I couldn't stop thinking about those two kids, about how they died trying to get help, about how they might still be trying, even now, 67 years later. The thing is, I drive Highway 30 twice a month. It's part of my regular route. And after that first encounter, I started seeing them regularly. Not every time, but often enough that I learned to expect it. Always on Friday nights, always in the same location, always the same pattern. Boy first, appearing suddenly to make me slow down. Girl second, standing in the road, marking the danger spot. I told other drivers about it. Most laughed it off. Some admitted they'd seen strange things on that road too. One guy, an older driver named Carl who had been hauling freight since the 70s, told me he'd seen the kids dozens of times over the years. Said he'd gotten used to it. Said he always slowed down when he drove that stretch on Fridays, just in case, and he never had an accident there despite driving it hundreds of times. But there was something else Carl told me, something that made my skin crawl. He said the kids weren't just warning people anymore. They were looking for something, or someone, and the more time passed, the more desperate they seemed. I didn't understand what he meant until 3 months later, when I saw the girl up close for the first time. It was another Friday night, same stretch of highway. The boy appeared as usual, forcing me to brake. But this time when I stopped, the girl didn't just stand in the road. She walked toward my truck, came right up to the driver's side door and looked up at me through the window. Her face was wrong. Not decomposed or monstrous, just wrong, too pale, too smooth, like a photograph that had faded over time, losing detail, becoming less real with each passing year. But her eyes were sharp, focused, and when she raised one small hand and pressed it against my window, I felt the temperature in my cab drop 20 degrees in an instant. She mouthed something. I couldn't hear it through the glass and over my engine, but I could read her lips. The same two words, over and over. Help us. Then she pointed, not at the forest where her body had been found, not at the guardrail where the car had gone over. She pointed east, down the highway, toward something I couldn't see. When I looked back, she was gone. The boy too. Just empty road and darkness and the sound of my own breathing, ragged and too fast. I should have driven away, should have continued my route and tried to forget what I'd seen. But I couldn't. Those two words kept echoing in my head. Help us. What did they need help with? They were dead, gone. What could I possibly do for ghosts who had been haunting a highway for almost 70 years? I drove slowly east, following the direction the girl had pointed. The road curved through more forest, past scenic overlooks and historical markers. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing stood out. Then I saw the turnoff. A small side road I passed 1,000 times without really noticing. No sign, no indication where it led. Just a narrow gravel track disappearing into the trees. Something pulled me toward it. Not the kids themselves. They weren't visible anymore. But I felt their presence. Felt them urging me forward, telling me this was important. I pulled my rig as far off the highway as I could and grabbed my flashlight. The side road was too narrow for my truck anyway. You have to walk. The gravel track wound through dense forest for about a quarter mile before opening into a small clearing. In the center sat the rusted remains of a 1950s sedan, so overgrown with blackberry vines and moss that I almost missed it in the darkness. The family's car, the one that had crashed in 1957. It had never been recovered. The embankment was too steep, the location too remote. The authorities had left it where it fell, and over the decades the forest had swallowed it. I approached carefully, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The car was in worse shape than I expected. The roof had collapsed, the windows were long gone. Rust had eaten through most of the body panels. But in the back seat, tangled in vines and covered in 67 years of decay, I found them. 2 skeletons, small, one larger than the other, the children who had supposedly been recovered and buried decades ago. They'd never been found. The official story was a lie. The authorities had declared them dead based on the crash, but the bodies had remained here, hidden in the wreckage, slowly decomposing in the back seat of their family's car while their ghosts walked the highway above. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing, understanding finally why the children appeared every Friday night, why they seemed so desperate, why they'd been trying to get someone's attention for almost 70 years. They wanted to be found, wanted to be properly buried, wanted to rest instead of being trapped in an endless loop of trying to prevent the accident that had killed them. I called the police from my truck, told them I'd found human remains in the forest off Highway 30, gave them the exact location. They were skeptical at first, but when they investigated and found the car, found the skeletons, the story made national news for a few days. 2 children missing since 1957, finally recovered, officially identified through dental records, properly buried next to their parents in a cemetery outside Hood River. The family was together again after 67 years apart. I didn't tell the police about the ghosts. Didn't mention the boy appearing in my headlights or the girl with her red ball. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I knew the truth. The children had led me to them. Had finally found someone willing to look. I still drive Highway 30 twice a month. Still pass that stretch of road where I first saw them. But I haven't seen the boy or girl since the night I found their bodies. The road feels different now. Lighter somehow, like a weight has been lifted. And on Friday nights when I drive through there, the forest doesn't seem quite as dark. The curves don't feel as dangerous. Sometimes I wonder if they were finally at peace. If being buried properly was enough to let them rest. Or if they were still out there somewhere, walking that stretch of highway, trying to warn drivers about the curve that killed their family. I hope they were at rest. Hope they found whatever peace ghosts can find. But part of me knows the truth. Some things leave marks too deep to erase. Some tragedies echo too loudly to ever fully fade. The Columbia River Highway still winds through those dark forests. Cars still crash on those curves. And every Friday night, somewhere between the mile markers where that family died in 1957, I bet someone sees a boy appear in their headlights. Sees a girl with a red ball standing in the road. And if they were smart, they'll all slow down. They'll all listen to the warning. They'll all remember that sometimes the dead are trying to help us, trying to save us from making the same mistakes they did. Because the boy and girl aren't too malevolent. They were not trying to cause accidents. They were trying to prevent them. They were still that 10-year-old brother trying to get help and that 7-year-old sister who just wanted her ball back. They were still there, still watching, still warning. And I slow down every time I drive past, just in case. Just to honor them, just to acknowledge that I heard their message and I found them and I helped them go home. It's the least I could do for 2 kids who spent 67 years trying to save strangers from dying the way they did. Story 8. Vortex effect. I measured myself 3 times before I accepted that I lost 4 inches of height in under 2 hours. And that is when I realized the Oregon vortex wasn't just bending light or playing tricks with perspective. It was changing us. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a structural engineer from Sacramento, 47 years old, divorced, no kids. I deal in measurements, calculations, physics, things that follow rules, things that make sense. Which is exactly why I drove 6 hours to Southern Oregon to visit the House of Mystery at the Oregon Vortex. I wanted to debunk it. Wanted to prove that this famous roadside attraction was nothing more than clever angles and optical illusions designed to separate tourists from their money. I brought my laser level, my digital measuring tape, my smartphone with a dozen apps for detecting magnetic anomalies and gravitational variations. I was going to document every trick, expose every gimmick, and maybe write an article about it for an engineering journal. Show how even educated people can be fooled by simple physics when it is presented the right way. The Oregon Vortex sits in Gold Hill, a tiny town off Interstate 5 between Medford and Grants Pass. The attraction has been operating since the 1930s, built around an old mining assay office that supposedly slid off its foundation during construction and ended up in a spot where the laws of physics don't quite work right. Balls roll uphill, brooms stand on end by themselves. People appear to grow or shrink depending on where they stand. All easily explained by optical illusions and sloped floors, according to every skeptic who ever written about the place. The building sits on a hill. The angles are deliberately confusing. Your brain gets tricked into seeing things that aren't really happening. That is what I believed when I pulled into the gravel parking lot on a gray October morning. The place looked exactly like every other roadside tourist trap. Hand-painted signs, a small gift shop, woods pressing in from all sides, maybe 24 cars scattered across the lot, families and couples heading up the trail toward the House of Mystery. I paid my admission to an elderly man at the ticket booth who barely looked at me, just took my $20 and waved me toward the path. No guided tour scheduled for another hour, but I could explore on my own. That suited me fine. I wanted to take measurements without some tour guide feeding me the official story. The trail wound through dense forest for about 100 yards before opening into a clearing where the House of Mystery sat at an odd angle, like someone had picked it up and set it down wrong. It was a simple wooden structure, maybe 30 feet long, with a sloped roof and windows that seemed too small for the walls. Even from a distance, something about it looked off in a way I couldn't immediately identify. I approached with my equipment ready, my phone recording everything, my engineer, his brain already analyzing angles and sightlines. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no insects, just the sound of wind through the trees and my own footsteps on the wooden platform that surrounded the building. The second thing I noticed was the temperature. It dropped at least 10 degrees as I stepped onto that platform, cold air flowing around me like I walked into refrigeration. My breath came out in visible clouds despite it being a mild 50-degree morning. I started taking measurements, set up my laser level to check if the platform was actually tilted the way it appeared to be. The results confused me. According to my instruments, the platform was perfectly level, but my eyes insisted it was sloped. My inner ear, the biological gyroscope that tells you which way is up, couldn't decide. I felt dizzy, slightly nauseous, like being on a boat in rough water. I moved to the famous demonstration area where balls supposedly roll uphill. Set one of my own steel ball bearings on the wooden channel. Released it, watched it roll slowly upward against what should have been gravity, its pull. My instrument said the channel was tilted downward in the direction the ball was rolling. Physics said this was impossible, but the ball kept rolling, kept moving uphill, gaining speed as it went. I picked it up and tried again. Same result. Tried a different ball. Same thing. The balls were rolling uphill, and no amount of laser levels or measurement tools could explain why. That should have been my first warning. Should have been the moment I packed up my equipment and left. But stubborn, arrogant, my ex-wife used to say. I don't accept things I can explain. So I decided to try the height comparison demonstration. There are 2 platforms in the vortex area, about 20 feet apart, supposedly at the exact same elevation. The famous trick is that a person standing on one platform appears taller than a person standing on the other, even though the platforms are level. It is presented as proof of the vortex's power, but every skeptic knows it's just forced perspective. The platforms aren't really level. One is higher than the other, and the angles make your brain misinterpret what you see. I measured both platforms with my laser level. They registered as exactly the same height, precisely level with each other, down to the millimeter. Then I stood on the left platform and took a photo of myself with my phone positioned on a tripod at my eye level. Walked to the right platform and took another photo from the same camera position. When I compared them on my screen, I looked 4 inches shorter in the second photo. 4 inches, in 20 feet of walking. I measured myself against a fixed reference point, a Mark 1 D made on the wall of the house at exactly my height. On the left platform, the mark was at my eye level. On the right platform, it was 4 inches above my head. I actually gotten shorter, not appeared shorter, not looked shorter because of angles or perspective. Actually physically lost 4 inches of height by moving from one spot to another. My hands started shaking. This wasn't an optical illusion. This was real physical change. Something in this place was affecting the actual structure of my body, compressing me, making me smaller. I moved back to the left platform, checked my height against the mark again. Still 4 inches shorter. The change hadn't reversed. That's when the real panic set in. Because if I lost 4 inches permanently, what else was changing? What was happening to my bones, my spine, my internal organs? Was I being compressed uniformly, or was the change uneven, potentially damaging? I tried to leave, turned toward the trail back to the parking lot, but my sense of direction was completely scrambled. The trail I walked up should have been directly behind me. Instead, everywhere I looked seemed to lead deeper into the woods. The clearing with the parking lot had vanished, replaced by dense forest in every direction. The other tourists I'd seen earlier were gone too. The clearing was empty except for me and the house of mystery with its wrong angles and its impossible physics. I checked my phone. No signal. Not unusual in rural Oregon, but the time display was wrong. It showed 3:47 p.m. I arrived at 10:30 a.m. I'd been in the vortex area for maybe 40 minutes. Yet somehow 5 hours had passed. Or my phone was malfunctioning. That seemed more likely, except my watch showed the same time. And the light filtering through the trees had that late afternoon quality, golden and slanted. That comes hours after the gray morning I arrived in. Time had slipped. 5 hours gone in 40 minutes. And I lost 4 inches of height. The Oregon vortex wasn't an optical illusion. It was something far worse. I tried to run, picked a direction that felt like it should lead to the parking lot, and sprinted into the trees. The forest seemed to shift around me. Trees that should have been in front of me suddenly appeared behind me. The ground tilted at angles that made no sense, uphill becoming downhill, flat areas becoming slopes. After what felt like 20 minutes of running, I found myself back at the house of mystery. Same clearing, same wooden structure, like I had gone in a circle despite running in a straight line. My phone now showed 6:23 p.m., another 3 hours gone in 20 minutes. And when I checked my height against that reference mark, I lost another 2 inches. 6 inches total, half a foot. I was shrinking, and I couldn't escape the area that was doing it to me. I sat down on the platform, trying to calm my breathing, trying to think logically. There had to be an explanation. Some kind of localized gravitational anomaly. A magnetic field that was affecting my instruments and my perception. Something scientific, even if it was something science hadn't discovered yet. But I couldn't explain the height loss. Couldn't explain the time slippage. Couldn't explain why I was trapped in a clearing that should have had clear exits but somehow looped back on itself no matter which direction I traveled. The sun was setting now. I could see it through the trees, that deep orange color that comes right before darkness. In another hour it would be night, and I'd be alone in the woods with a phenomenon I didn't understand and couldn't escape. That's when I saw the others. They emerged from the trees one by one. People, or they had been people. Now they were wrong, distorted. Some were impossibly tall, 8 or 9 feet. Their proportions stretched like taffy. Others were compressed, maybe 4 feet high but normal width, like they'd been squashed. Some were twisted, their bodies bent at angles that shouldn't support life. But they were alive, moving, walking toward me with jerky, unnatural movements. And their faces held the same expression of confused terror I could feel on my own. They'd been caught too. Caught in the vortex, changed by whatever force operated in this place. And they couldn't leave either. Couldn't escape the clearing that had become their prison. One of them reached toward me. A woman who might have been normal-sized once but was now barely 3 feet tall. Her body compressed into a squat, dense form. Her mouth moved like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Or maybe the sound was pitched wrong, distorted by the same force that had distorted her body. I scrambled backward, my engineer, his brain completely overwhelmed. This wasn't physics. This wasn't anything science could explain. This was something else. Something that lived in this spot, this vortex, feeding on whatever made people the size and shape they were, twisting them, changing them, trapping them. My phone showed 9:47 p.m. 3 more hours gone in what felt like minutes. And when I checked my height again, I lost another inch. 7 inches total. I was 5'5" now instead of 6 feet. Still proportional, still functional, but visibly smaller. Noticeably changed, the distorted people surrounded me. Not threatening, just watching, waiting, maybe wondering if I'd end up like them, maybe hoping I could find a way out so they could follow. I tried everything. Tried walking in perfectly measured straight lines using my compass. Tried following the sunset to orient myself. Tried retracing my exact steps from when I entered. Nothing worked. Every path led back to the clearing, back to the house of mystery with its wrong angles. The phone hit midnight. I'd been trapped for over 13 hours by its clock. But subjectively, it felt like maybe 3 hours had passed. Time moved differently here, faster outside my perception, or slower inside it. Either way, I was losing hours without experiencing them, and I was still shrinking. Another 2 inches gone, 5'3" now. Definitely abnormal for an adult man. Definitely noticeable. The distorted people grew closer, more of them emerging from the woods. Some were barely recognizable as human anymore, twisted into shapes that looked more like abstract sculptures. And all of them trapped. All of them changed. All of them unable to leave. Was this the vortex? It's a real secret. Not an optical illusion for tourists, but a trap. A place where the fundamental rules of space and time broke down. Where human bodies could be reshaped like clay. Where anyone who stayed too long became permanently altered and permanently trapped. I noticed something then. The most distorted people, the ones who barely looked human anymore, were also the ones who seemed most faded. Translucent, like they were slowly becoming part of the vortex itself. Losing their substance along with their shape. Was that the end point? Get changed enough, stay trapped long enough, and you simply dissolve into the anomaly? Become part of whatever force operated here? My phone died at 3:17 a.m. Battery exhausted, or maybe time had finally broken it completely. Either way, I lost my ability to track the hours as they slipped past. I was maybe 4'11" by then, child-sized. My clothes hung loose. My perspective on the world had shifted fundamentally. Everything looked bigger, more threatening. And I was so tired. The vortex seemed to drain energy along with height and time. I wanted to sleep, wanted to close my eyes and rest. But I was afraid if I slept, I'd wake up even smaller. Or wake up twisted like the others. Or maybe not wake up at all, just dissolve into translucent nothingness while I dreamed. Dawn came eventually, gray light filtering through the trees. My first sunrise in the vortex. Though I couldn't tell if a full night had actually passed or if time had compressed and only hours had gone by. I checked my height against the reference mark one final time. 4'6", 18 inches lost. 1.5 feet of my body simply gone, compressed into nothing by whatever force operated here. But something had changed with the sunrise. The trail was visible again, clear and obvious, leading out of the clearing back toward where the parking lot should be. I ran for it without hesitation, expecting to loop back like every other time, but the trail stayed straight. The forest didn't shift, and after maybe 5 minutes of running, I burst out into the parking lot. My truck was there, covered in dust and leaves like it had been sitting for days. The parking lot was empty otherwise. No tourists, no cars, no attendant in the ticket booth. I got in and drove. Didn't stop to ask questions or investigate. Just drove south on I-5 as fast as legally possible, putting miles between myself and the Oregon vortex. I am in a motel in Redding now, California, safe distance away. I've measured myself a dozen times with the tape measure I bought at a hardware store. 4'6", consistent. The change seems to be permanent. I looked in mirrors, seen what I'd become. A grown man and a child. This body. Proportional, functional, but wrong. Obviously wrong. Permanently altered by something I still done. Do you understand? Tomorrow I'll have to figure out how to explain this. How to tell my employer, my ex-wife, my friends. How to live in a world where I am 1.5 feet shorter than I was 2 days ago. But tonight, I'm just writing this down. Getting it documented before the memory fades or distorts like everything else in that place. The Oregon vortex is real. Not an optical illusion. Not a tourist trap. It is a genuine anomaly where the rules break down and human bodies can be reshaped by forces we don't. Do you understand? And those people I saw, the distorted ones, they're still there. Still trapped, still slowly changing into something that isn't to human anymore. Do you know why? Dawn. Do you know what made the trail appear at dawn when it had been invisible all night? Maybe the vortex lets some people go. Maybe it keeps the ones it wants and releases the others. Or maybe I just got lucky. Either way, I am never going back, never getting close to Gold Hill again. And if anyone asks why I am suddenly 18 inches shorter, I'll make up some medical condition. Some genetic disorder. Anything but the truth. Because the truth sounds insane. The truth is that somewhere in southern Oregon, there is a place where physics breaks down, where human bodies can be compressed or stretched or twisted, where time slips and space loops and people get trapped forever. The Oregon Vortex ISN to an attraction. It is a warning, a sign that reality is thinner than we think. And some places, some spots on this earth, reality breaks down completely. I survived it, but I didn't escape unchanged. Ella, carry this forever. Carry the memory of those distorted people. Carry the missing 18 inches. Carry the knowledge that the world is stranger and more terrible than any engineer miscalculations can account for. Stay away from the Oregon Vortex. Dawn, to visit the House of Mystery. Dawn, to test the anomaly. Because some things can be explained or measured or understood. Some things just are. And some things will change you in ways you can never reverse. Story 9. Correction, I found the folder in my father's storage unit 3 weeks after his funeral. He died without warning. Heart attack in his sleep. Clean exit for a man who never had a clean day in his life. The unit smelled like motor oil and old paper. I was looking for anything worth keeping when I saw it. A weathered manila folder marked MF, do not open, in my father's handwriting. His hand shook when he wrote it. I could tell by the way the letters trembled. I opened it anyway. Inside were newspaper clippings about Michael Frank. The Oregon Corrections Director stabbed to death outside his Salem office in January 1989. I knew the case. Everyone in Oregon knew the case. Officially solved. A drifter named Frank Gable convicted. Case closed. But my father had notes scrawled in the margins. Notes that made my stomach drop. Notes that said he was there that night. My father was a prison guard at the Oregon State Penitentiary for 32 years. He retired in 1995 and never spoke about his work. Not once. Not even when I asked. Now I understood why. The first clipping was from the Statesman Journal. January 17, 1989. Body found at 7 a.m. Multiple stab wounds. Frank was investigating corruption in the prison system. He had a list, names of guards and administrators involved in illegal activities, drug trafficking, extortion, things that went deeper than anyone wanted to admit. My father, this note said, they knew he would release the list. They knew he would destroy everyone on it. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit and read every piece of paper. Every clipping, every handwritten page. My father documented everything. Dates, times, names I recognized from his old work stories. Guards he called friends. One name appeared over and over. Stephen Dempsey, a captain at the prison. My father wrote that Dempsey ran everything. The whole operation. Frank was going to expose him. Dempsey could not let that happen. My father wrote that he saw Dempsey leave the prison the night Frank died. 2 a.m. Dempsey never worked night shifts. My father was working the tower. He logged it in his personal notebook, but not the official record. He wrote that he was afraid. The final note was dated 2003, 14 years after the murder. My father wrote, I should have said something. I should have told the truth. But they made it clear what happens to people who talk. I have a family. I stayed quiet. God forgive me. I took the folder home. I could not sleep. I kept reading the notes. Kept seeing the fear in my father's handwriting. He carried this for decades. It ate him alive. I decided to look into it myself. Stupid decision. The kind you make when you think you are doing the right thing. I started with Stephen Dempsey. I found his obituary online. Died in 2011. Heart failure. Natural causes. But one detail stood out. He retired in early 1989. Right after Frank's murder. Took his pension and disappeared to Arizona. I found other names from my father's notes. Most were dead. The ones who were alive were old. Retired. Quiet lives in small Oregon towns. I reached out to one. A man named Carl Winters. He was a guard at the same time as my father. I called him and told him who I was. There was a long silence on the phone. Your father was a good man, he finally said. His voice was thin, shaky. He left some notes, I said, about Michael Frank. The silence stretched longer this time. You should let that alone, Carl said. I just want to understand what happened. You do not want to understand, he said. Trust me. He hung up. I drove to his house the next day. A small place outside Eugene. Overgrown yard. Peeling paint. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again. The door opened. Carl stood there, thinner than his photos, pale. His eyes darted behind me to the street. "You should not be here," he whispered. "I need to know what my father knew." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. His living room was dark. Curtains drawn. The air smelled stale. He sat down and gestured for me to do the same. "Your father and I worked together for years," Carl said. "Good man. Kept his head down. Did his job. But that night changed him." "What happened that night?" Carl stared at his hands. "Frank was going to blow the lid off everything. The drugs, the money, the people involved went all the way to the top. Dempsey was the muscle, but there were others. Politicians, lawyers, people you do not cross." "Did Dempsey kill Frank?" "I do not know who held the knife," Carl said. "But I know who gave the order." He leaned forward. His face was gaunt, haunted. 3 days after Frank died, we had a meeting. All the guards. Dempsey stood up and said that anyone who talked about what they saw or heard would end up like Frank. He was not joking. 2 weeks later, a guard named Tony Perez started asking questions. He wanted to go to the police. "What happened to him?" "They found him in his car. Heroin overdose. Tony never touched drugs in his life." I felt cold. "They killed him. They made it look like an accident," Carl said. "Just like they made Frank's murder look like a robbery. They are good at covering their tracks." "Why did Frank Gable go to prison?" Carl laughed, a bitter sound. "Frank was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was a nobody, a drifter, easy to pin it on. They fed him to the system and everyone moved on." "My father knew this. We all knew this," Carl said. "But we had families, mortgages, lives. You do not go against people like that and survive." I left Carl's house feeling sick. My father spent 30 years knowing the truth and saying nothing. I could not blame him. Fear makes cowards of everyone. But I could not let it go. I started digging deeper. I found a retired investigator named Harold Quinn who worked on the Frank case. I called him. He agreed to meet me at a diner in Salem. Harold was in his 70s. Thick gray beard, sharp eyes. He ordered coffee and looked me over. "You are John's kid," he said. I nodded. "You knew my father?" "I interviewed him after Frank died. He told me he did not see anything unusual that night." I knew he was lying. "Why did you not push him?" Harold sighed. "Because I was told to close the case." Gable confessed. "We had our guy. The bosses wanted it done. I had 20 years on the force. I did what I was told." "Do you regret it?" "Every single day." He leaned back. "Frank was a good man. He was trying to clean up a corrupt system. They killed him for it, and we let them get away with it." "Who gave the order?" Harold looked around the diner. Then he leaned close. There was a man named Richard Carlson, state senator at the time. He had connections to the prison system, financial interests. Frank's investigation would have destroyed him. "Is he still alive?" "Alive and powerful," Harold said. "He is retired now. Lives in Portland. Runs a consulting firm. Untouchable." "Can you prove he was involved?" Harold shook his head. "No evidence. Just whispers. Rumors. The kind of thing that gets you killed if you repeat it too loud." I left the diner with a name. Richard Carlson. I looked him up. Successful career. Multiple terms in the state senate. Retired in 2005. Now he ran a government consulting firm. Clean record. Respected. Untouchable. I wanted to confront him. To make him answer for what he did. But I am not stupid. I knew what happened to people who pushed too hard. Then strange things started happening. I came home one night and my front door was unlocked. I always lock my door. Always. I went inside. Nothing was missing. But things were moved. Subtle. My desk drawer slightly open. Papers shuffled. Someone had been inside. I called the police. They took a report. Told me it was probably nothing. Maybe I forgot to lock the door. Maybe I moved things and did not remember. They made me feel paranoid. But I was not paranoid. 2 days later, I noticed a car parked across the street. Dark sedan. Tinted windows. It sat there for hours. When I walked outside, it drove away. I started seeing it everywhere. Outside my work. Near my gym. Always at a distance. Always watching. I called Harold Quinn. Told him what was happening. "Get rid of everything," he said. His voice was urgent. "Every document. Every note. Burn it. Then stop asking questions. I cannot just let this go." "You have to," Harold said. "These people do not play games. They have been covering this up for 35 years. You are not going to crack it. You are just going to get yourself killed." I did not burn the documents. I could not. They were all I had left of my father's conscience. But I stopped making calls. Stopped digging. I hoped they would leave me alone. They did not. 1 week later, I got a phone call. "Unknown number," I answered. Silence on the other end. Then a voice. "Low, Calm. You have something that does not belong to you. Who is this? The folder. Destroy it. I do not know what you are talking about. Yes, you do. Destroy it. Walk away, or you will regret it. The line went dead. I sat there shaking. They knew about the folder. They had been watching me long enough to know everything. That night I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed wrong. The next morning I went to the police. I told them everything. The folder, the threats, the car following me. They listened, took notes, told me they would look into it. Nothing happened. I realized then that my father was right. These people had power, reach. They could make problems disappear. I thought about running, leaving Oregon, starting over somewhere far away. But I knew they would find me. So I made a choice. I scanned every document in the folder. Every note, every clipping. I uploaded it to a secure server. Then I sent copies to 3 journalists, people who covered corruption cases. I told them everything, gave them all the evidence. Then I burned the original folder. If they wanted to silence me, the truth would still get out. 2 of the journalists never responded. The third sent me an email. She said she would investigate. She said it might take time. She said to be careful. That was 2 weeks ago. The car stopped following me. The phone calls stopped. Everything went quiet. I do not know if that means I am safe or if they are just waiting. I think about my father, about the weight he carried, about the choice he made to stay silent. I understand it now. Fear is not cowardice. It is survival. But I also know that silence has a cost. Michael Frank deserved justice. Frank Gable deserved freedom. My father deserved peace. Maybe the truth will come out. Maybe it will not. Maybe I will disappear like Tony Perez, like everyone else who got too close. But at least I tried. At least I did not stay silent. And every night when I close my eyes, I see my father's handwriting. That trembling note, God forgive me. I hope he does, because I am not sure I ever will.